The snow came down in thick, heavy sheets that night, the kind of storm that silences entire neighborhoods and paints the world in blinding white. Most people had already retreated indoors, huddling by their fireplaces or clutching mugs of hot cocoa, but one man was still outside, pushing his old snow shovel against the ever-growing wall of drifts that threatened to bury his walkway. His name was Marcus, a single father with shoulders broad enough to carry more than just snow, though life had forced him to carry far heavier burdens. The street lamps glowed faintly through the blizzard, but visibility was near zero. Marcus paused for a moment, squinting against the gusts when he heard it, a faint cry. At first, he thought it was the wind howling through the trees, but then it came again, a desperate, panicked scream for help. Without hesitation, Marcus dropped his shovel and pushed forward into the storm. His boots sank deep, every step a battle against the freezing snow. The sound grew clearer. Someone was trapped. Following the voice, Marcus spotted a small sedan half, buried in a snowbank at the intersection. Its hazard lights blinked weakly through the veil of white. Inside, a woman pounded frantically on the window, her face pale with fear. The storm had swallowed her car whole, and the bitter cold was seeping in fast. Marcus wrenched at the door, but it was frozen solid. Planting his feet, he yanked with all his strength until it finally gave way, snow pouring inside like an uninvited guest. "Are you all right?" he shouted over the roaring wind. The woman gasped for air, her lips trembling, eyes wide with panic. I can't feel my hands. Please. Come on, we've got to move." He scooped her arm over his shoulder, supporting her as they fought their way back toward his house. Every step was a struggle, the storm pelting them relentlessly, but Marcus pressed on. His muscles burned, his lungs screamed, but he didn't let go. By the time they reached his front porch, both were drenched in snow, shivering violently. Marcus pushed the door open with his hip and ushered her inside. The warmth of the house wrapped around them like a lifeline. "Sit," he ordered gently, guiding her toward the worn-out couch by the fireplace. He quickly threw a blanket over her shoulders and lit the fire, the crackle of flames filling the silence. The woman sat trembling, trying to form words. Thank you. I thought I was going to." She couldn't finish. Tears brimmed in her eyes as the reality of how close she had come to danger hit her. Marcus crouched down in front of her, his dark eyes steady. "You're safe now. Just breathe." For a moment, they locked eyes. He saw more than fear in her gaze. There was something else, a depth, a shadow of struggles untold. She wasn't just a stranger who had gotten caught in the storm. There was a story there, waiting to be uncovered. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside, two lives. One hardened by loneliness, the other scarred by hidden battles, had just collided in a way neither of them could have predicted. Marcus leaned back on his heels, his chest still rising with the aftershock of adrenaline. He hadn't let anyone into his home, let alone his life, in years. But tonight was different. Something in the way this woman clung to the blanket, her breathing uneven, her gratitude raw, it struck a chord in him he thought was long frozen over. And though he didn't know it yet, this night, this storm, and this fragile beginning would change everything. The fire snapped and hissed, sending a trail of sparks into the air as Marcus leaned back against the arm of the couch, watching the woman carefully. Her face was still flushed from the cold, and she clutched the blanket like it was the last barrier between her and the storm still howling outside. He noticed her hands, slender, elegant, but trembling as if the chill had burrowed all the way into her bones. She finally managed a weak smile. I don't even know your name, Marcus," he said simply. "I'm Danielle." She paused, as though testing whether she could trust him with her name. Then she whispered, "Thank you, Marcus." If you hadn't found me, I don't think I would have." Her voice trailed off. Marcus nodded, uncomfortable with the weight of her gratitude. He wasn't used to it. Saving people wasn't new to him. At least, it hadn't been once. But the last time he tried, the outcome had been very different. He got up and busied himself in the kitchen, putting on a pot of coffee. Anything to escape the pull of her eyes and the storm of memories tugging at his chest. As the bitter aroma filled the air, his mind drifted back to years before, to the moment his own life had unraveled. Marcus hadn't always been this way, quiet, reserved, shutting the world out. Once, he had been a man with laughter in his heart and dreams that stretched beyond the walls of this modest house. He had a wife, Evelyn, whose laughter could light up even the darkest days. Together, they had a daughter, Naomi, a little whirlwind of joy who inherited her mother's smile. For a while, life had been perfect, until the night the accident happened. A drunk driver, a stretch of icy road. One phone call that shattered everything. Evelyn was gone. Naomi, only 6 at the time, had survived. But Marcus never forgot the sound of her cries at the hospital, calling for the mother who would never return. That night, something inside him froze. He didn't know how to grieve and still be a father, so he buried his pain under layers of silence and routine. Work, chores, raising Naomi the best he could. Those became his armor. But the warmth, the laughter, the part of him that once believed in love, it was gone, locked away like a treasure he no longer deserved. He poured 2 mugs of coffee and carried them back into the living room. Danielle was staring into the fire, her eyes distant, as if she too was fighting ghosts. "Here," Marcus said, handing her the mug. "Thank you." She whispered, curling her hands around the warmth. After a moment, she added, "I wasn't just out driving for no reason. I was running." Marcus tilted his head slightly, but didn't press. Danielle took a sip, then exhaled shakily. "From people, from expectations, from myself. Everyone thinks I'm strong, that I've got it all figured out. But the truth is, I've been breaking inside for a long time." Her confession hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. She continued, her voice low. "I grew up fighting for everything I have. My parents pushed me, the world tested me, and I fought back in ways people couldn't see. On the outside, I was always composed, but inside, I was tired, so tired. Tonight, when my car got stuck, I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe I don't have to fight anymore." Marcus's chest tightened at her words. He knew that feeling, of wanting to let go, of wondering if the weight was too heavy to carry. For a long time, he'd hidden it under fatherly duty, under silence, but he recognized the same war in her. "Then you showed up," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I wasn't alone. Her words struck him harder than he expected. He wanted to speak, to tell her that he understood, that he too knew the cold grip of despair. But the words got stuck in his throat. He wasn't ready to open the door to his own pain. Instead, he said quietly, "Sometimes the storm wants us to believe it'll last forever, but it doesn't. It never does." For a moment, silence reigned, filled only by the fire's crackle and the muffled roar of the blizzard outside. Danielle studied him, as though sensing that behind his calm voice was a history he wasn't sharing. "Marcus," she said softly, "you've lost someone, haven't you?" He froze. It was the kind of question that slipped past his defenses, one he couldn't dodge without betraying the truth. His jaw tightened, and he turned his gaze to the fire. "Yes," he finally admitted, his voice gravelly, "someone I can't ever get back." Danielle's eyes softened with empathy, but she didn't press further. She simply reached out and touched his hand gently, her fingers light but steady. For a man who had built walls so high, the simple gesture was disarming. The storm outside battered the windows, relentless, but inside, two wounded souls sat by the fire, their scars laid bare, their silence speaking louder than words. And though neither of them said it out loud, both felt something stir in the warmth of that living room. Something fragile, tentative, but alive. It was the beginning of a thaw. Morning came slowly, with pale sunlight pushing through the thin curtains. The storm had finally passed, leaving the world outside buried in fresh, glistening snow. Marcus stood by the window, sipping the last of his coffee, while Danielle sat quietly at the kitchen table. Neither spoke much. The silence between them was comfortable but fragile, like a truce that might break if either said the wrong thing. Naomi bounded down the stairs, her braids bouncing, her smile lighting up the room. "Dad, there's so much snow. Can we build a fort later?" Marcus smiled faintly. "We'll see." Then his eyes softened when Naomi noticed Danielle sitting there, wrapped still in a borrowed sweater of his. "Hi," Naomi chirped, her curiosity innocent. "Are you Daddy's friend?" Danielle's lips curved into a shy smile. "I guess I am for now. I'm Danielle." Something in the way Naomi welcomed her without hesitation stirred a warmth in Marcus, but it also unsettled him. Naomi didn't understand the complexity of letting people in. To her, kindness came naturally. For Marcus, it felt dangerous. Later that day, as Danielle prepared to leave, her car now dug out with Marcus's help. The hesitation in both of them was obvious. Marcus wanted to ask her to stay longer, to check if she'd made it home safe, but he didn't. Danielle wanted to thank him again, to tell him how deeply their conversation had stayed with her, but the words tangled on her tongue. They parted with a quiet, lingering glance, two souls too guarded to admit they wanted more. Days passed, and life pulled them back into their separate worlds. Marcus returned to his routines, work, chores, raising Naomi. Yet something felt different. The house seemed quieter, the nights longer. He found himself thinking of Danielle when he least expected it, while packing Naomi's lunch, while shoveling the driveway, even while tucking his daughter into bed. Danielle, too, couldn't shake the memory. That night by the fire replayed in her mind, not just because Marcus had saved her, but because he had seen her, truly seen her, in a way most people never did. But with that closeness came fear. She had built her life on independence, on showing the world her strength. To let someone in felt like weakness, and weakness was something she couldn't allow herself. When they finally saw each other again, at the local grocery store of all places, the reunion was awkward. Marcus had Naomi with him, who immediately ran up to Danielle with excitement. "Danielle, you're here. Daddy, can she come to our house again?" Marcus stiffened, embarrassed, while Danielle laughed nervously. "Maybe another time, sweetheart." But behind the smiles, the tension was palpable. Marcus wrestled with whether to invite her, unsure if it was too forward. Danielle hesitated, fearing she'd lean on someone when she had promised herself never to depend on anyone again. That unspoken hesitation became their first wall. The second came a week later. Danielle, pressured by her job and the demanding expectations of those around her, found herself retreating back into her old patterns, keeping busy, projecting strength, never showing weakness. When Marcus called to check in, she let the call go to voicemail. Not because she didn't want to talk, but because the idea of someone truly caring scared her more than being alone. Marcus, on the other hand, took her silence as rejection. The old wounds inside him whispered cruelly, "See, this is why you don't open up. People leave, they always leave. By the time Danielle reached out again, Marcus's walls had risen higher. He answered curtly, his voice steady but distant. She felt the shift immediately, and it stung. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I wasn't avoiding you because I didn't care. I just needed space. Everyone needs space." He replied, his jaw tight. "I get it." The conversation ended too quickly, both of them more unsettled than before. The third challenge came not from within, but from outside. Word traveled fast in their small neighborhood, and soon the homeowners association began whispering about Danielle. Some disapproved of her lifestyle, her independence, even her presence near Marcus's home. The HOA president, a petty, arrogant man who loved control, went as far as to confront Danielle one evening as she walked down the street. "You don't belong here," he sneered. "Women like you, single, trouble, always stirring things up. You're not the kind of neighbor we want." Danielle clenched her fists, rage burning inside her, but she kept walking. The insults followed her like knives. Marcus, hearing about it later, wanted to defend her, but Danielle stopped him. "No," she insisted firmly. "I've been fighting battles like this all my life. I don't need rescuing." But Marcus could see the hurt in her eyes, the same hurt she tried so hard to hide. And for the first time, he realized just how deep her scars ran. Their connection, so fragile and new, was being tested by silence, misunderstanding, and a world that wanted to keep them apart. Both wanted to bridge the distance, but both were too afraid of what it would cost. And yet, beneath the tension, something remained, a quiet pull, like the faint warmth of a fire refusing to go out even in the coldest winter. The question was, would they let the storm win, or would they fight for the warmth waiting just beyond their fear? The tension between Marcus and Danielle lingered for days, unspoken but heavy, like frost creeping over glass. They had drifted closer, only to be pushed apart by misunderstandings, pride, and wounds too raw to touch. Marcus buried himself in routine again, work, school runs, house repairs, telling himself it was easier this way. Danielle did the same, pouring herself into her job and keeping busy enough to silence the ache of what might have been. But fate has a way of forcing hearts to confront what they try hardest to ignore. Another storm rolled in one Saturday evening, fiercer than the first. Wind howled against the rooftops, rattling windows as if the sky itself were angry. Marcus had just tucked Naomi into bed when his phone buzzed. A text from Danielle. "I'm outside." His heart lurched. He rushed to the window and saw her figure standing by her car at the curb, snow already piling on her coat. He yanked the door open. "Danielle, what are you doing out here? You should be home." She looked up at him, her face streaked with snowflakes and tears. "I couldn't stay away, not tonight, not anymore." Before Marcus could respond, headlights flared down the street. A black SUV rolled slowly to a stop, and out stepped Harold, the HOA president who had harassed Danielle before. His voice sliced through the storm. "I told you, this neighborhood doesn't need your kind, and now you're dragging Marcus into your mess." He smirked, his arrogance amplified by the storm. Then, with a cruel laugh, he hurled an egg that splattered across Danielle's coat, yolk dripping down into the snow. Marcus's blood boiled, but before he could move, Danielle straightened. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped forward, peeling off her coat, revealing not just the strength in her stance, but the quiet steel in her eyes. "I've had enough," she said, her voice steady, carrying even against the roaring wind. In a blur of motion, Harold lunged closer, trying to intimidate her, but he didn't know the truth. Danielle wasn't just a woman who carried scars and silence. She was a black belt in karate, years of discipline and resilience forged into every fiber of her being. With precision and calm, She blocked his advance, her movements fluid and powerful. One swift motion sent him stumbling back into the snow, his arrogance melting into shock and fear. He scrambled, slipping, as Danielle stood tall, her breathing controlled, her eyes unwavering. Marcus watched, awe striking him harder than the storm itself. He had always seen Danielle as strong, but this was something else. Not just physical strength, but the embodiment of every battle she had fought and survived. Naomi had woken and peered out the window, her little voice calling, "Daddy, is Danielle okay?" Marcus glanced back at his daughter, then at Danielle, standing fierce in the snowstorm, refusing to be broken. In that moment, something shifted inside him. He saw not just a woman scarred by her past, but a partner who could face the storm beside him. When Harold finally slunk away, humiliated and defeated, Danielle's shoulders sagged. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving her shivering again. Marcus rushed forward, wrapping his coat around her, pulling her close. "You didn't have to fight him," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Her eyes lifted to his. "Yes, I did. Not just for me. For every time someone tried to tell me I wasn't enough. But Marcus, I'm tired of fighting alone." The words pierced through the last of his defenses. For years he had told himself it was safer to stay cold, to never risk the warmth of love again. But here she was, raw and unguarded, asking not for rescue, but for partnership. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. "Then don't fight alone anymore. Let me fight with you." For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the snow swirling around them, the storm raging, and yet, between them, a warmth stronger than the cold. Marcus kissed her, tentative at first, then deeper, the kind of kiss that thawed the frozen parts of him he thought were gone forever. Danielle melted into him, not as someone who needed saving, but as someone who had finally found a place to rest her strength. Inside, Naomi clapped her hands against the window, giggling, "I knew it. Daddy likes her." The storm howled louder, but it no longer felt threatening. Instead, it was a backdrop, a reminder of what they had overcome. The blizzard outside symbolized their fears, their loneliness, the battles they thought they had to fight alone, and the warmth between them, fragile, real, undeniable, was proof that even the harshest winter could give way to spring. That night, as they sat together by the fire once more, Marcus holding Danielle's hand firmly in his, neither spoke much. They didn't need to. The silence that once kept them apart was now a silence of peace, of belonging. The storm had not won. Love had. The days after the storm carried a different rhythm in Marcus's house. The snow still lay thick across the neighborhood, but inside, there was warmth that hadn't been felt in years. Naomi bounced around the living room with uncontainable joy, delighted by Danielle's presence. She asked endless questions, braided Danielle's hair with clumsy fingers, and dragged her into snowball fights in the yard. For Naomi, it was simple. Her world had expanded to include someone who cared. For Marcus, it wasn't so simple. He often caught himself standing in the doorway, watching the two of them laugh, his chest tightening in a way that was both painful and healing. Painful because it reminded him of Evelyn, of what he'd lost. Healing because it proved he hadn't lost everything. Life had given him another chance, and this time he wasn't too frozen to reach for it. Danielle, too, felt the shift. For so long, she had carried her strength like a shield, showing the world only her resilience while hiding her exhaustion. But with Marcus and Naomi, she didn't have to pretend. She could laugh without guarding her tone, cry without apologizing, and share her scars without fear of judgment. In this small home, she wasn't the fighter, the survivor, the woman always pushing against the tide. She was simply Danielle, loved, accepted, seen. The HOA bully, Harold, tried once or twice to reassert his control, but something had changed. His words no longer carried weight, not with Marcus standing firm beside Danielle, not with neighbors quietly shifting to admire her courage instead of echoing his pettiness. Even the children of the street looked at Danielle differently, whispering about the night she stood in the snow like a warrior. Harold's sneers eventually faded into silence. One evening, weeks after the storm, Marcus and Danielle sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching Naomi build a crooked snowman in the yard. The sky above was painted with streaks of orange and pink, the kind of winter sunset that steals your breath. "You know," Danielle said softly, "I used to think storms were a sign to hide, a reminder that life was too harsh, too cruel, but now—" She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the glow of the sky. "Now I think storms are just reminders of how strong we can be, and how much warmer it feels when someone's beside you." Marcus squeezed her hand, his voice quiet but sure. "For years I thought my heart was done, that it froze the night I lost Evelyn. But you and Naomi, you've shown me it wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the right kind of warmth to bring it back." Danielle leaned her head on his shoulder, a tear slipping down her cheek, though this time it was not from pain but gratitude. "And I thought I had to keep fighting alone forever. But maybe strength isn't just about standing alone. Maybe it's about knowing when to let someone stand with you." The snow crunched as Naomi ran back to them, her cheeks red from the cold, her smile wide. "Daddy, Danielle, look at my snowman. Isn't he perfect?" Marcus chuckled. "He's a little lopsided." Danielle grinned. "But he's standing tall. That makes him perfect." Naomi beamed and nestled between them, pulling the blanket tighter around all three. And there, under the fading winter sky, with the snowman leaning slightly to one side, but still holding strong, they found a new kind of family. Not one free from scars or storms, but one forged through them, resilient, real, and full of hope. Life didn't promise them ease. There would still be challenges, misunderstandings, days when the cold felt stronger than the warmth. But they had learned something invaluable. Storms pass, but love has the power to stay, to heal, to make even the iciest heart beat again. For those who watched from the outside, it was just a man, a woman, and a little girl learning to laugh again. But for Marcus and Danielle, it was everything. It was proof that even in the harshest winter, a fire can be rekindled. Proof that second chances are real. Proof that sometimes the people you save end up saving you, too. And as the last light of day slipped into night, the porch glowing with quiet peace, Marcus whispered words he never thought he'd say again. "Welcome home." Danielle closed her eyes, letting the weight of those words settle into her soul. Home, not a place, but a feeling, and for the first time in years, both of them finally felt it. The storm had brought them together, but love, that was what would keep them warm forever.